Итак, друзья, у меня для вас прекрасная новость. Вы подошли к ключевой...
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a great news because we are coming to the key discussion of our forum, within which the leading experts are going to use the discussions which have been held here, to build the chain of future technology. What key trends are establishing the technological future? What bridges will be more sustainable during the nearest future? And how to make the scientific research be applicable? I welcome the moderator of this session, Tatiana Naumova, the head of the NTV channel project. And here we also see Mr. Arkady Dvorkovich, the chairman of the Skolkovo Foundation, as well as speakers, the Nobel Winner Prize of 2011, Thomas John Sargent, and Yevgeny Kaspersky, CEO of Kaspersky Labs. Yes, thank you very much, Mikhail. I have some technical moments here I wanted to mention. This is very standard for all my sessions in the Open Innovations. First of all, I want you to be interactive. Please write them in the window underneath the broadcast on the website of Open Innovations. We will add it to the discussion between our speakers, and I would like to divide things into two parts. First, we need to gather information to discuss on. That is why I will speak a little bit with each our speaker for about 7 minutes, so it's about half of the time. So to get the whole idea, and then another half of the time will be spent for the discussion itself, including your comments, including your questions. Please tell us what megatrends are for you, what is not a megatrend for you, which is very interesting as well, where exactly you find them, how you find them, etc., etc., etc. Everything which will come to your minds during the first phase of our discussion should be in the comments or the discussion. So I have my tablets and I will look through all of this information. And now let us take a look at the session itself, a little bit about the session. I've been reading a lot and preparing myself, and nobody writes a lot about megatrends, they write a lot about trends. But I liked a wonderful number from Peter Diamandis. He is futurologist, entrepreneur, he is good friends with Elon Musk, and he says that during the next 10 years we will achieve a bigger progress compared to 100 years in total, which have passed, of course. And also he believes that there will be the trillionaires, the first one, so we are not used to billionaires yet, and he's talking about trillionaires. And he believes that they will use the resources which will be extracted from space, moon, asteroids, etc. So that's going to be the source of their richness. So I'm not urging us to become such diamantuses in an hour, but please don't be modest. So if we do not come up with the megatrends, but let's try to at least think what is going to change our lives, hopefully for the better, within the next 10 years. Mr. Sargent, I want to start with you. First of all, thank you very much for participating in this session. And I guess one of the obvious megatrends that I would like to discuss within the session is the increasing trust towards science. And of course, it is very easy to show it using on the example of healthcare. The vaccines have been developed very fast. And speaking about the megatrends, there are not much things written about this, but anyhow, Ipsos issues the annual report. And this year they are talking about the fact that each sixth person out of 10 agrees that we will find a cure against all the diseases. And if we compare it to some earlier reports, then in 2013 there were only 25% of such people who really believed in that. But if we take a look at it from the point of view of science, what exactly can we consider to be megatrends, and what megatrends are you personally following, and what megatrends are next step projects, and how exactly do I understand that this is a megatrend?
Okay, this is a great question. So let me give you an example. So in 1900, somebody asked one of the greatest physicists and mathematicians alive at that time, Henri Poincaré, to predict what the great new scientific discoveries and movements in science were going to be in the next 100 years, and what the innovations were going to be. And Poincaré's answer was, I have no idea. And because innovations are by definition surprises, there are things that we couldn't predict, because if we knew about them, we would have been using them. And so if you think 1900, what wasn't known? Okay, what wasn't known? Einstein's theory of relativity, information theory, all sorts of things about DNA and genomics. Those were big surprises. And the reason Poincaré said that in 1900 was, if you go back to 1800 and ask whether anyone could have predicted the great scientific advances of the 19th century, like electricity, advances in, telegraphs, radio, those were big surprises. So I guess my first my answer is, in terms of megatrends, and big surprises, it's exciting to think about them, but everyone has to be. I have to be very humble about saying that I know where they're going to come, because just in my lifetime, as a participant in economic science, there have been big surprises, often brought by young people who were doing unorthodox things that we didn't, think were going to work out. They were taking big risks. So I guess that's how I would set the stage.
I would like to ask a question. Professor Sargent.
Do you believe that there is more trust?
Yes.
Given what you said, probably there is more trust to physics, people who do chemistry, medicine. But what about economists? Do people trust economists now more than before?
Oh, that's a great thing. So I don't know. Economists are people who let me make a case that people should trust economists more, because and I think they do, for the following reason. I'll give you a serious answer. If you look at what the huge social event of the 20th century that caused a great deal of disorder, it was the Great Depression, that affected all market economies. It actually didn't affect the Soviet Union, which is an interesting story by itself, but all market economies, Germany, England, the United States, they suffered a huge breakdown in their economy. And it brought down, unemployment rates shot up to, 25% or higher. There was mass unemployment. There was a lot of suffering, and governments didn't know what to do. Governments in the West did some things that actually made it worse. And this was not just an economic event; it was a political event. You would not have had the bad political developments in Central Europe. Basically, the Nazi regime came into power, if you study the elections, because of the Great Depression. So this was a terrible event. Economists didn't know what had caused it, and because they didn't know what had caused it, they didn't know how to fix it. So there was a great deal of work about business cycles and how to have the government monitor, the central bank and the Treasury, do things to make business cycles less severe. So if you kind of fast forward, I think that project has been a success. because we've had threats of severe recessions. One in the financial crisis, in 2007 and 2008. Another one this last year with a pandemic. And in both instances, policymakers took what economists had thought they learned from the Great Depression, and they made things much better. And in my field, that's a great victory. So the way I'd say it is, economists, do we know everything? No. The future is very hard to predict, but just because we don't know everything doesn't mean we don't know anything. And we learned some really important things, and if we keep track of them, we know how to fight business. We know how to fight Great Depressions much better. So yeah, I think you should trust economists.
Господин Сержант, я, в принципе, была готова к тому, я, наверное, даже готова к
I
тому,
think I
что
was ready for
все
this.
мои спикеры будут уходить от ответа
I
про
thought that
мегатренды.
that
Делать прогнозы,
all
я очень
speakers will
благодарна.
try to
Мне
avoid
это
talking about
стисло.
megatrends,
Вы говорите о том,
but
что
you
да, вот
said
мы научились,
that we have
да,
learned something.
мы
We
научились
have
лучше
learned to better
предугадывать, мы
forecast.
научились
We have
лучше
learned to
выходить из тех
better
кризисов,
overcome
например,
crises like the Great Depression, as you stated. But we have another assistant here. I'm talking about AI. We recently had a major conversation on that. Without any exception, G4, McKinsey, the Big Four, everybody talked about artificial intelligence being a megatrend. So can it help economists to be trusted even more as a result?
That's for me. Okay, so let me say something about artificial intelligence and what fuels it. First, it's very exciting. It's helping. It's having massive effects on economics. You all know that. It's fueling all sorts of transactions that can be done online. It's fueling all sorts of information processing and helping people share information. If you kind of step back and ask, what's so new about it? And when were the foundations laid? How were you able to do it? Kind of back up and say, well, so the foundations were laid by visionary people who were dreaming and doing things that maybe people thought were useless. One of them was a great Russian, Kolmogorov. So if you ask what artificial intelligence and machine learning is, it's based on two things. It's based on statistics, the discipline of statistics, which is, the abstract mathematical theory of how we can take data and learn things about what's really governing the world. That's the field of statistics. It's grown up in the last 200 years, basically. It had a huge push forward in the 1930s by the Russian Kolmogorov, who vastly extended it. But his things you couldn't put on a computer because there were no computers, and furthermore, there weren't very much data. Okay, so if you fast forward, this was a mathematics that was sitting there waiting for some essential technical things to arrive, engineering things, and there were basically two things. There were computers, which would be cheap and powerful. And what's happened in the last 3 decades is that computer technology has accelerated. Part of the reasons it accelerated is for frivolous reasons. People want to play computer games or look at silly things on the internet. And then what happened was businessmen said, if they want it, we'll generate it. But in creating the things to play computer games, they created the very things that Kolmogorov needed to actually do machine learning for real. So it's kind of interesting how this happened. And then the other thing you needed was lots of data. And where are the data being generated now? It's being generated by businessmen and women who are creating applications to do exchanges and sell goods online. And in the process of doing that, they're creating huge data sets. And with those data sets, that's kind of what's fueling all sorts of things. Creating those huge data sets is what made people figure out how to apply statistics to do facial recognition. And doing facial recognition helps you create artificial intelligence systems to run an automobile. So these things, the relationship between what businessmen do, entrepreneurs do, because they want to create better products, because they want to make money, for selfish reasons. They want to make money, so they create better ways to serve consumers. But in the process of that, they push forward technologies that help us solve these new problems and open up these surprising things. If you had asked Poincaré, this great scientist who knew more than any of us, in 1900, if he could have imagined any of these things, he'd say, you're telling fairy tales. Anyway, so that's my answer.
Но это очень хороший переход, на самом деле, для
This
меня
is a
как
very
другого
good segue to this conversation with Evgeny, because we recently heard how this so frivolous things like computer games, they still helped to create cheap computers, fast and powerful computers. So Evgeny, tell us honestly, so will you avoid my questions about megatrends? I'm sorry, we cannot hear you. We have a technical problem. I cannot hear you.
Интересно, с какой стороны.
So I wonder where it's coming from. So I just pushed the wrong button. Okay, now. Okay, I'm responding. I don't like Zoom that much. So sometimes I make mistakes. I'll be honest. I can talk about megatrends only if I know what to say. If I don't know what to say, then I will not be responding. So let's start with simpler things. I really liked your interview that you gave at the forum about Safe Communicator. Your lab develops it. And also the costs. Your response was very interesting. You said, I'm an inventor. I'm not a commercial guy. I'm not a salesperson. So if we talk about megatrends, if we talk about future projects, so what are you monitoring? And do you agree that cybersecurity is definitely a megatrend? Good question. So what am I monitoring closely? Well, nothing specifically. I monitor situation in general. If there are any interesting ideas or things, of course I know them. And I'm not alone. I have many smart, intelligent people, colleagues around me who tell me what I should pay my attention to. So it's not like I'm going fishing for a specific fish, but I'm sitting by the river and just watching it. So do you have a trend watching a department in your lab, or? No, not exactly like that. It's more of a group of people with whom I talk on a permanent basis, and it's their objective to share all the new things with me. But when we discuss news, just all the new things they have seen, any anomalies they have taken, they have noted, etc. Just one example. So what are the things that shocked you, surprised you, made you think, or maybe you thought like, oh, this is something that deserves attention? So one thing that really shocked me and surprised me, it was the coronavirus. So because it seemed to be so small and insignificant, and here we are with all the consequences, and all the world has been affected. And speaking of artificial intelligence, I don't like this term because AI, it's just a marketing term. It's an algorithm that you train. It will take maybe 500 years before we reach true intelligence, because AI is basically algorithms. Those are good algorithms, but they deal with very specific tasks, and they cannot deal with unknown tasks. If we get any worm or cyber threat or a virus, so then we need maybe a day or a couple of days to figure out how it works and to provide the antidote. If we talk about cybersecurity, but if we talk about biological viruses, so it takes time to develop a vaccine to overcome this problem. So those are so biological products, they're 1,000 times more sophisticated than digital ones. So intelligence of a frog is 1,000 times stronger than any AI that we use. So don't even call it artificial intelligence. Should we call machine learning? Machine learning, big data machine learning is much better. Okay, so they're not used universally, but they have a very narrow field of application. It looks like the most advanced cyber criminals, they also use machine learning algorithms. In fact, it was a good reason I brought up cybersecurity. Maybe today, but maybe a couple of years ago, we felt like it was about large corporations, but not about SMEs. It's not about myself as an individual, but now it has changed. If we look at statistics, I think there was a BCG review. 63% of attacks are on SMEs, with an average check of $3 million. So, like, it's a ransom of $3 million, and we'll fix it for you. And in 60% of cases, companies go bankrupt. So here's the question. So in your lab, do you see that shift? So there's this shift towards SMEs and individuals, and the cybersecurity is something that we all are concerned about. It's the opposite. If we talk about cybercriminality, it's the opposite. 15 or 20 years ago, victims were regular users, internet users, individuals or SMEs that didn't have the money or resources to be properly protected. So that situation was still like that in 10 years ago, but then we saw that cyber criminals became more sophisticated. They started to attack larger companies. And probably the most notable case with the Carbonac cyber band, cyber gang. So you can look it up. So that was the first time. So until then, cyber criminality, that was something minor, just something amateurish. It's not a big problem. And then cyber spying, so the states were doing that. So those were two different levels in terms of professionality. But in 2014 and 2015, cyber criminality reached the same level. So when they have a systemic approach to hacking large companies, banks, so it happened in 2014, 2015. And major companies became victims of cybercriminality. So cybercriminality feeds off, small fish and large fish alike. And my last question, let's come back to that phrase that I already quoted. I'm not an I'm more of an inventor, I'm not a salesperson. But still, how do you understand this? And when did you realize that cybersecurity is what you want to do? Okay, this is the thing to do for me. Potentially, it's promising. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is where I can invent something that will change the world for the better. It's not necessarily a megatrend, but still. In fact, it's a good question. There was a time when I realized that this is a serious thing. In the beginning, cybersecurity was not a big problem, and for me that was a hobby basically. Computer viruses, I was collecting them, and maybe in the middle of 1990s I realized that the sophistication of those viruses was rising, and combating them became more and more complicated. We didn't have cyber criminality because there was no money in the internet, no mobile phones, no online banking, no transactions online, etc., etc. So they were just hooligans, internet hooligans, people who enjoyed making other lives of others miserable. So, back in those days, I realized that this problem was going to be big and serious because majority of inventions are about humans fighting nature. Laws of physics, mathematics, chemistry are in place, they're operational, and people come up with technologies, with materials to overcome those laws of nature, so to speak. If we talk about criminality or cyber criminality, it's human mind fighting another human mind in cyberspace, and I realized that was very serious, and eventually things were going to get much, much worse, and unfortunately I was right. Cyber goons became cyber criminals. Eventually they adapted to the changes, to the changed environment, and they started to go after large companies, and now we see even worse times coming our way when professional cybercriminal gangs start paying attention, or they have seen, they see so industrial. So they're simple internet users, and maybe you know, followed the wrong link and your money was stolen. Then you have SMEs, then you have major businesses, and they become victims of professional cyber gangs. And the next one is the worst segment is infrastructure, critical infrastructure, and industrial infrastructure, which also has vulnerabilities and which can be exploited. Thank you for that, Evgenia. It is going to be a bit more difficult for you, Arkady, because you're right here and you will not be able to evade my questions. Okay, I have plan B. So which megatrends are you following? I would like to hear the answer from somebody. Okay, thank you for the question. I'm an economist, and I also used the Sargent's book when in my studies. So I don't want to evade any questions, even though economists do that often. If we talk about economic trends, the most interesting one, a dilemma, besides what has with the recovery that we see that it comes to an end, actually. And we have inflationary pressure. Most likely key rates will go up. Budget deficit is very serious, very big in some countries, slowing down of growth rates. That will happen in the nearest future. we will see some additional social tension because of high inflation. So we have this macroeconomic trend. It's very interesting. But another economic trend is related to technology, about climate agenda, which is a hype, especially after Glasgow, that conference, COP26.
Это явное давление.
So it puts pressure on all the countries to change their energy mix, the sources of energy generation from hydrocarbons and mostly coal and oil to switch to renewables. There are some discussions about nuclear energy. Different countries have different views. Then there's this topic of hydrogen. There are topics related to storage technologies and energy distribution, because renewables will not be able to be used on a large scale without that. But all technologies are fairly expensive, and who will pay for that transition from cheaper energy sources to more expensive energy sources? And if investments will be down, so things will become more expensive. Even developed countries, will they be able to survive that high price environment? And social burden may be too high when you do this transition, and maybe the transition will be much slower than people think now, because social issues should be dealt with. And also we have different levels of development. We have advanced countries, USA, Germany, France, UK, Japan, and they want to have that transition. And when you compare them to countries like India, African countries, or South Asian countries, the difference is so huge. This disbalance will lead to different paces of transition, and it's not clear how new technologies will be used. So whether advanced economies will be willing to pay the costs of the transition. On the one hand, they contributed to the pollution the most in the past, but whether they will take that responsibility upon themselves, we'll need to see that. And there are also some technological developments. There are three topics. One that we already discussed: big data and their processing and use in different spheres, any sphere, in fact. You should understand, is there a limit in our desire to use more and more data and rely more and more on algorithms of deep machine learning, and consequently think less for ourselves when we deal with medicine, with security. But of course, we want people to think. Even with chess, it's a clear picture. It's better to have a combination. So you have deep machine learning and you have human thought. So the combination of the two produces the best result. And I do hope that people will keep thinking. And second topic is transition from people to machines, like autonomous vehicles, robots, and other mechanisms that replace humans. So machine learning also plays towards that, but it has a physical representation. So some engineering. So we'll see more and more of that. But where is the limit to it? It's still not clear. And where that megatrend will just become a reality for all of us, and there will be no more revolutionary development. And then the third one, new materials that may change our perceptions and may truly change the costs, the convenience, the safety of the use of material things in this world. For environmental purposes or for safety or for cutting costs, they can be created for different purposes, but definitely new materials will be created. There'll be a combination of known molecules, but in new ways. So nanotechnologies or even other microscopic levels to create materials and objects with properties as they would like to have in medicine, even in furniture, anywhere. It can be done. And I think that trend will be a big one in the following 10 years. And if we'll add a meta-universe, because we do not understand how we will function there, but in terms of being tactile, and so it's not there yet. Let's come back and talk about climate agenda, but it's quite obvious trend. I would like whether it will become a mega trend. ESG, everybody talks about it. ESG is just another term for all those things, but it's been around for about 10, 20 years. When I joined the president's office and I was working on national agenda, so they talked about 1.5 degree Celsius that we should not exceed. Then sustainable development was added. So sustainable development goals were developed. The SDGs were developed, so they were added. That's right. And inside of them, we have all those issues: environment, climate, social development. After that, we started talking about corporate and social responsibility. So to make sure that corporations are involved with those things. Now we talked about ESG, environment, social governance. It's the same thing. It's just a different. Maybe it's higher on the agenda, but it is also used in competition. Those things are important, but there is used in global competition because some are paying and others are getting benefits. But it's Skolkovo. Of course, we develop solutions related to ESG, green transition, monitoring of climate, of environment, recycling of waste, etc. So, and we can see there's a lot of interest towards that. And Skolkovo, who is hunting for megatrends, is it Skoltech? In terms of fundamental science, yes. If we talk about business solutions, it's those hundreds and thousands of startups, because they look for new ideas all the time. Sometimes they change their models totally. They come to us with a model and then everything changes. They just turn it upside down. And last question, and we receive a lot of questions in our chat. But I wanted to ask you this. If we talk about Nexttech, it looks like it's about a deep tech, interdisciplinary, deep technologies, innovations, and with lots of investments. What needs to be done that these projects, that Russia has more of such projects? We understand there's some barriers that they face because people, not everybody understands innovations, and businesses may have some issues they may not trust. So is it about scientific development or is it about a budget provided by the government? Okay, 5 things. I came up with them on the go. So if he kept talking, probably I would come up with another 5 things. We need to understand how different disciplines relate to each other. When we talk about technologies, specific technologies, if we talk about economics and cybersecurity, there is no such solution that can work without deep understanding of the technology. And also need to know the economy, how it can work in the market. It will be impossible to use this product without IT security, cybersecurity. So all those 3 things should be understood very well. Secondly, what is important here? Understanding what should be changed legally in law application and in culture of law application, law enforcement. In many countries, legislation stands in the way of innovations because they support conventional technologies. And now only recently we had this law on regulatory sandbox, but generally laws are conservative. Thirdly, funding of science. So by the governments and also by private sector, so it's so insufficient, and even doubling for the government, it's nothing. The government can double the funding without any detriment to anything else. Fourthly is openness. You cannot do it in one country only or in one territory only. So sovereignty is important. It is ensured by competencies in critical areas. For any country, it's true. It is important, but you cannot advance if you work only inside your own market. And fifthly, it's the people, human resources, new generation of experts, of developers and users. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. 20 минут, давайте.
That's a whole ecosystem. That is great. We have 20 minutes left, and let's go through the questions. First one is to you, Mr. Sargent. So you have been answering our economic questions, and let us really get back to the economy here, because we cannot ignore this matter. And this is maybe not exactly the mega trends, but there's definitely a trend. So, Mr. Sargent, what do you think? Can we expect a new economic crisis like the failure of the markets in 2008?
Okay. So here's one thing I would think about. Actually, let me loop back to a couple comments that were made earlier, which I really like. The characterization of the skeptical characterization of artificial intelligence as a sales pitch, really not as a valid description. And I like the metaphor of right now, artificial intelligence can't do what a frog can do or a fish can do, which have little tiny brains. And kind of, I'm leading up to an answer to your question, but if you kind of think about what intelligence means, what is if you want to talk about artificial intelligence, first thing you got to talk about is human intelligence. So what do human beings do that we think make us intelligent? You just sit back and think. And I'd say two things. One is we look out at the world and we recognize patterns. Somehow we have the ability to recognize patterns. And that's really, it's really simple. An example would be, we somehow take our observations and we abstract patterns from them. We're just endowed with that ability. Then the second thing is we somehow interpret those patterns and make decisions. We make decisions in light of our view of what the patterns are, make decisions to achieve certain purposes. So pattern recognition and making decisions, that's what we mean by intelligence. And now if you talk about artificial intelligence, well, it's trying to copy those two things. And, and as the previous speaker said, it's pretty good at some kinds of pattern recognition, so-called deep learning. All that's doing is taking a huge amount of data and kind of mindlessly looking for patterns. It's much less good in making decisions. And it's not very good at all at making decisions in some situations that people are pretty good at making decisions. People are pretty good at making decisions when you throw them into an entirely new situation where old patterns have broken down and they have to think out of the box. That's what quote unquote artificial intelligence is way behind. Anyway, so that is a background. So now, in answer to your specific question about the economy today, I'm going to do some pattern recognition and tell you. I'm going to tell you a pattern that I would look at to think about today. And at least in my country, the United States, the metaphor is using the war on COVID. The war on COVID. And, it's not a war that we're fighting, fortunately, other people, but we're fighting this other organism. So that's not a good part of the metaphor, but the good part is, what have we done? And here, if you look at what the Treasury of the United States has done and the Federal Reserve in the United States, it looks a lot like World War I and World War II. And I have graphs that could show you this. And it looks at in the following way. During both of those wars, the United States government had huge government expenditures that it did not cover with taxation. It essentially borrowed, it issued a lot of government debt, and it printed a lot of money. So if you fast forward to the war on COVID, now the metaphor is very good. In the last, now it's almost 2 years, we've run government deficits, expending more than we tax, by World War I or World War II amounts in terms of the ratio to GDP, completely unprecedented in peacetime. And the way we've financed it is the Federal Reserve, the central bank, has printed a bunch of money, just like it did in the earlier two wars. Okay, now I said that's what it did. Now, what was the consequence of the government doing that in those two earlier wars? Well, came out of the war with a big government debt to GDP, after both wars, there were inflations, big inflations. So now kind of we've set ourselves up in a situation where the fundamentals that drive inflation we've set the stage for, unless we break that pattern, think intelligent, now thinking somehow, unless we break that pattern, there's a threat of ongoing inflation. And that inflation after those, after World War II, that inflation partly served a purpose. It had actually devalued, it paid off part of the government debt that we incurred into the war by inflating it away. So there's always a temptation to do that. And we've set the stage for that. And not only the United States, other countries. So that's a situation we're in, and markets are concerned about that. And almost every time when the chairman of the Federal Reserve or a Federal Reserve governor goes and gives a talk, he or she is asked about this now. And they should be asked about it. And they should be asking the Congress people too about it, because they're the ones who have engineered this situation. So not a mega trend, it's a situation. I'd say it's a situation that's going to play out in the subsequent years.
Ситуация, на которую точно надо обратить внимание.
Yes, the situation which we have to highlight and never forget about. I do support you here. Okay, let's think about this one. Evgeny, during the periods of the development of the AI, the machine learning, etc., can this system be hacked? Should we worry about this? As any cyber system, yes, of course it can. But let me answer the question when actually the bubble is going to blow up. Nobody knows. The real intellect doesn't know. The artificial doesn't know as well. Because honestly, it really feels like .com, just like bubble. It smells just like that. So I'm sure that sooner or later it's going to blow up. And speaking about the machine learning and AI, whether everything is prone to hacker attack, of course, everything digital is fragile, is vulnerable this way or another. It can be attacked and used in malign goals. And that is why for many years we are creating the systems of cyber immunity. We are shifting from the technology of cyber safety, which is basically what is it. So there is the operational system and there is the security over it. And right now we're thinking about a new concept, the cyber immunity, when the security is part of the system's DNA. So it's like a mask on your face. And this is security. And immunity is after you get vaccinated. Well, not right away, but in 2 days you're gonna get better. But anyhow, if we take a look at the systems which are critically important and critical, I believe that they have to be built on the principles of cyber immunity in order for them never to be penetrated by the cyber attack. If we're talking about global innovations, I think that in cyberspace, and I'm going to agree with the previous speakers, because we have this cyber word everywhere around us. And I think that one of the global innovations in the digits is transference of the physical systems to the principle of the cyber immunity. That's my position. Thank you. Arkady, just take a look at what we have for you here. You didn't speak about digital money, the cryptocurrency, and this is once again a megatrend which we never actually mentioned today. Yes, so people are testing in China their own system. 2 megapolises are actively implementing their technologies in US. Speaking about Russia, it's not too clear. So, and is it a megatrend, and what actually awaits Russia? Well, let me start from far away, just like Thomas did. So everything began from Kolmogorov, and then there was a break, because most of the researchers started working with other principles, and machine learning, which was close to the work of the brain, was postponed for several years. And in the beginning of the 70s, this topic became popular and relevant. There emerged scientific groups which studied it in the US, first of all, in Europe, in France, in England, the UK, and some things have been developed there. Some approaches started appearing. But as Thomas said, there was no big data, no computers. And what happened next? After that, in 20-25 years, the internet appeared, big data appeared, computers appeared, and machine learning became popular again. And only now it became applicable in many fields. If we're talking about the bubble, I would like to comment on the previous question as well. So there was this analysis in one of the newspapers, 3 leading Chinese companies which are doing the recognition of images. So in the beginning of 70s, they actually learned how to distinguish cat and the dog, and many things actually were capable then. And only in 50 years we actually managed to start recognizing the voices, the faces, etc. But anyhow, 3 leading Chinese companies working in the field of image recognition faced the problem that they don't know how to expand their markets, because the main consumers were the state organizations which were working in the field of security, and sometimes banks, and how to grow next. And I guess this high level of stakes might be too exaggerated. And speaking about the cryptocurrency and crypto activity, we mix 2 things here. So we think about cryptocurrency and we mix crypto assets, because these are the means of investments and saving money. Cryptocurrency is taking up a little share of the markets, really share of the market. So, and this is also used for black market, for gray market, the money laundering and the selling of the illegal weapons, etc. But if China makes their cryptocurrency liquid, and if they will manage to convert it and convert yuan into the
Китая. Что касается
cryptocurrency, then it's going to be a mega trend. And speaking about the crypto assets, they are actually growing and they will keep growing. And I believe that it makes more sense compared to the cryptocurrency as is. I'm rather skeptical about it, but this trend is going to grow because there is a demand, there is the market for this. For face recognition, as I mentioned, it's rather limited, but there is the trend for this particular thing, and it's going to be developing. Yes, there is a potential. You know, a terrible thing happened. We're running out of time. We have only 5 minutes. It means that I have only 1 minute per each speaker, and it's going to be blitz. This question has been asked by the moderators of all the plenary sessions, and I have already seen about 20 answers to these questions. And what do we want to do with this? We want to gather all the answers. This is going to be the forecast, of course. We are going to speak about the forecasting. Why else we would gather here? We want to accumulate these forecasts, these prognoses, and to place them into the time capsule to save them until the next Open Innovations Forum, open them, and then take a look at who's actually forecast implemented the best it could. Let's not think for too long. This is 12 months perspective. That is why the question is rather simple. If we take a look at 2022, what technology of the 2022 can radically change the life of a human being and will be implemented next year? So, Evgeny, let's start with you, just for the difference sake. In short, I don't know, and nobody knows. So, maybe it's going to be something good, which is going to change the human life for the better, but maybe something really bad, which is going to worsen our lives and be a burden on us. Mr. Sergeant, have some mercy on me. So please don't shoot me like that. So just say something good, at least one thing which can actually change what we are looking at for the better in next year.
Okay, there's some smart guys in, I think some of them are from Russia. They're using group theory and gauge theory from physics and graph theory to reformulate and simplify some neural nets. They're even applying it to biology. I'll bet on that.
Отлично. Ваша ставка, Аркадий?
плохо, да.
Well, that was really good, actually. I wanted to chime in with Evgeny. No, no, no. Evgeny has only one advantage. He's online. If he would be sitting beside me, I would actually push him to answer this question. But okay, I will answer two. Have two answers. I hope that somebody will convince everybody that the best protection against diseases is sports, and everybody would rush to gyms. So, and that would be a good thing, really. Well, even if not gyms, at least some exercises in the morning. But the second thing which can change people for the better, I think that the demand for smart people will rise, and we will hear more and more smart people like we hear right now. So like Thomas and Evgeny, and this will change the world for the better. Yes, and we will enjoy it, definitely. But I think this is a great note to finish this plenary session. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for your questions. And of course, a separate special thank you to all the speakers of our today's session. This was a great pleasure for me personally. Yes, and thank you for joining us in Skolkovo, actually, even if you are not physically here. Thank you.
Транспортно-логистический холдинг «Российские железные дороги». Мы развиваем транспортную инфраструктуру страны, строим новые станции, вокзалы и создаем новые возможности для вашего бизнеса. Лучшие скоростные и высокоскоростные поезда сделают ваше путешествие комфортным и безопасным. Мы – локомотив экономики. Сотни миллионов тонн грузов ежегодно. Развитие науки и социальной сферы – это наш вклад в благосостояние страны и ваша уверенность в завтрашнем дне.
Я новая Hyundai Creta. Hyundai.
Есть история фантастическая. Есть история сказочная. Есть страшная история. А есть история реальная. В Юка всегда реальная история и диагностика автомобилей с пробегом. Юка – официальный сервис Hyundai. Смотрите историю и диагностику автомобиля и покупайте его онлайн.